almost there. All right. So as I was mentioning, we're going to kind of review some of the disorders and whatnot that are amenable to group treatment. And then we will then, of course, go over the different type of groups and group processes that fit with those types of disorders as well. So the two of the disorders that I wanted to cover, I'll just bring this up. Let me share my screen. The two disorders that we're going to really focus on as far as group processes are, the first one is going to be post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? And the second one is going to be a personality disorder known as borderline personality disorder, okay? The reason why these two disorders really fit well with the group process is because the organic features of these disorders, meaning the need for medications and all of those types of things, are only a small part of the equation in their treatment, because these disorders are something that happens to you. It's not something that you might be genetically predisposed to experience a trauma response, or borderline personality disorder, for example, develops out of being raised in a childhood where there's a lot of abuse and there's a lot of harm to the child that it's kind of swept under the rug and isn't really addressed. And then into adulthood, because of that, it develops into this personality disorder, which we'll get into. So the reason why I'm choosing these two disorders is one, they really have to do more with life experience than they do necessarily because you're organically or genetically predisposed to develop the disorders, which makes them really malleable, really for group settings. Okay, so let's start with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I'm going to kind of give the diagnostic and statistic manual definition of these, just so that we're kind of using the same terminology. But what we will find when we get into discussing group processes is that this definition isn't probably all inclusive. So I just want to make that clear, okay? But we should go back just really quick and talk about just quickly, where are you? How we define really a disorder or a psychological disorder. And we're just going to use a quick definition here. Where are you? Here we are. Okay. So within this definition, when we talk about something that is quote unquote diagnostic, can be diagnosed and classified as a disorder, when it comes to psychological and mental disorders, we have to have what are called three persistent experiences with it, okay? The first one, though, is we have what's called a cluster of abnormal behaviors, okay? We all probably, if I go back to this slide here, we all experience these sometime in our life. We have hallucinations every single day when we open our eyes. We all have moments where we think a little bit delusional or paranoid. We all have depressed moods once in a while. When we get concerned about it is when these abnormal behaviors tend to cluster together. So maybe we experience things like sadness, delusions, paranoia, and anxiety at the same time, and they cluster with each other. Okay, so as you'll see when we define the different disorders we're going to use for group processes, you'll notice that they're defined as a cluster of different behaviors that a person is experiencing. Okay, so that is the first part. So um, this cluster of abnormal behaviors, okay? And then in addition to that, they must be what we consider deviant, distressful, and persistent over time, okay? Deviant in that it deviates from what you normally experience. So it's something that you actually recognize is going wrong with how you normally function. Okay. Distressful in that it causes different life concerns. It can cause employment issues. It can cause stress in a relationship and stress for the individual. Okay. And then the third one is persistent over time. Okay. And this one becomes important because, as I mentioned, we all will, I shouldn't say we all, the majority of us will, in some time of our life, experience depression from some type, whether it because of a loss of a loved one, a stressful time in our life, whatever it may be, we will all experience depression, as an example. We all probably, or I should say, I shouldn't say all, a good number of us, when we have a traumatic event happen in our life, will experience some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, all of those things are normal responses to something that is happening to a person in their life. Okay, but when it persists, when it doesn't, it seems to not have a break in its constant um, behaviors and mental processes of the individual, that's when we get concerned. Okay. And then, of course, one of the most important is that it's maladaptive. Okay, meaning that it's interrupting your religious, your political, your sexual life, your work life, your family life, and all of those things, and it's creating abnormality, as you would say, in your life. It's interrupting your ability to adapt and survive and those types of normal, no, I want to say, things we want. Okay, so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about a disordered behavior. Okay, now when we go to, let's go to, let's go back to post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. All right, let's go back then to, so again, following that line of thought, when we talk about PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, these are some of the criteria, some of the clusters of abnormality that a person can experience, okay? And one thing I do want to say about this is that when we're talking about these criteria, we always need to make sure we read the notes. The following criteria apply to adults, adolescents, and children older than 6. And so when we're dealing with kids who go through trauma under the age of 6, we have different criteria that needs to be considered. Okay. So in PTSD, we have the first, an exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. Okay. So, one, we have a traumatic event. Okay. So, we either directly experience trauma or we can witness it in some way. Okay. Now, It's important to, if you're going to work with people with trauma, to understand that PTSD doesn't need to be something that you directly experience. Okay. When we look at, for example, 9/11, and you have this huge traumatic event harming thousands of individuals, first responders, and all of those types of things. And during that time, we thought, wow, what I wonder if PTSD was increased during that period of time. Okay, but what we found is when we measured it, individuals that were at ground zero didn't develop PTSD at any higher rate than what we would expect in the general population, which is about 17%. Okay. However, people who were in a 100 square mile radius of 9/11 had the highest rates of PTSD symptoms. Okay. Why? According to the research that looked at it, it's because they felt helpless because they were too far away to engage in help, but they knew they were close enough that they could have done something if they really could. Okay. And so we find that those individuals within about 100-mile radius actually had higher rates of PTSD. Okay. And we find this quite often with especially like national tragedies where we can measure things on more of a mass level. It tends to be the people who witnessed it, but felt like they couldn't do anything about it. Okay. Learning about a traumatic event occurred close to a family member or close friend, in case of actual threat of a family member or friend. So this is when we didn't witness it, but we heard about it. Okay. If you go into this helping field, you will spend quite a bit of time talking about vicarious traumatization. This is something that individuals who work with individuals who have trauma have to be very careful about and make sure you engage in self-care behaviors, because listening to people's trauma day in and day out can actually result in the development of symptomology of post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. And then the other way of experiencing the traumatic event is experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of traumatic events. Okay. So, for example, first responders collecting human remains, police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. That can, again, this kind of vicariously seep in and develop this disorder. Okay. Um, okay. So that's list A. Those are the different ways that trauma can be experienced that then can develop into this disordered behavior. So then we start to look at those clusters of abnormalities, the symptoms. So for this criteria, you have to have one or more of the following and intrusive symptoms, meaning that it's not something that you expect, it intrudes into your life. Okay. The first one is reoccurrent or involuntary or intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event. Okay. We see that in children older than 6, repetitive play may occur in which themes and aspects of the traumatic event are expressed. So they might not be able to verbalize the memory or the reoccurrent thought, but they might play it out in some type of thematic play. Okay. Um, or recurrent distressful dreams in which content and or affect of the dreams are related to traumatic events. Um, Dissociative reactions. So this is you probably commonly hear things like flashbacks in which an individual feels or acts if the traumatic event is reoccurring again. Such as reactions may occur on a continuum, with most extreme expressions being complete loss of awareness of present surroundings. Okay. I had a good friend who came back from the first Iraq, no, the second Iraq War, whichever one, the Bush Junior War, um, and he had really hard times with the Fourth of July because of the fireworks. And there were a lot of times where he would go into this zone to where he felt and thought he was back in Iraq. He didn't realize he was in the United States at my house or at their house. He was there in that moment, in that place. And he started doing things like guard behaviors and all those kinds of things. So that's a complete disassociation. Okay. Other disassociations is the individuals may just kind of look like they're disappeared for a while. That their affect just becomes completely almost non-existent, and you kind of have to kind of help them come back to reality. So it's not necessarily that they disassociate to the place of trauma. It's that the mind becomes so overwhelmed that the reaction is to kind of shut down the person. Okay. The fourth one is intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that resemble aspects of the traumatic event. Um, and so on this end, it is well, when I worked with, for example, sexual assault victims, often the smell, a certain cologne smells would trigger a traumatic response out of the individual. It tended to be very olfactory for a lot of victims of sex crimes. And so certain smells, certain sights, certain colors that just kind of give a brief little cue can then ignite a trauma response. Okay. And then the fifth one is marked physiological reaction to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble aspects of the traumatic event. Okay. So this one is quick. This one tends to be longer. And so again, technically, one or more of these symptoms need to be present for an extended period of time in order to actually get the diagnosis, the official quote unquote diagnosis of the disorder. Okay. Um, but as you will learn, these things are much more complicated than saying, "Oh, you have two of these symptoms, so or you don't, or you do." It's a more complicated than this, and I just want to make sure we recognize that. Okay. Um, the other criteria for PTSD is a persistence avoidance of stimuli associated with traumatic events. And this can be evidenced by either avoiding of or efforts to avoid distressful memories, thoughts, feelings, or avoidance of the effort to avoid external stimuli like certain people and places in order to it's kind of a defense mechanism, a coping skill to try and get through for that. And then D is a negative alteration in cognitive and mood associated with traumatic events. You may have heard or you may have experienced a family member or a friend who uh, go into a active battlefield. They go in with a very kind, nice, and they can come out very aggressive and moody. Um, and I've also seen this dealing with individuals who have gone through sex crimes, those types of things. It's almost as if their personality shifts in order to try and deal with the symptoms they're experiencing. So it's marked by the inability to remember an important aspect of a traumatic event, typically due to disassociation, amnesia, head injury, alcohol or drug use. Persistent and exaggerated negative belief or expectations about oneself. Okay. And then persistent distorted cognitive thinking, consequences of the trauma event, such as blaming himself or herself, persistent negative emotions, fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame, and marked diminished of interest or participation in activities, feeling detached or estranged, and persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Okay. And before we go on, Ryan, I see you have your hand up, my friend. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a remark that that through a lot of like the training that I've done as far as being an airborne ranger, what they've actually done throughout the training was put you in different kind of situations to the point where when you hit that battle situation, you don't feel anything. Like it's more routine. So then when you take that when you get put in that situation, you don't have those recurring thoughts, or like the so you almost take the PTSD out of it, which I thought was very reading all this stuff here is it's actually kind of provocative because there's so much that they put you through, but then when you actually get there, of course there are two different things as far as training and everything like that, but they train you so much that you don't really actually feel that need to always rely on that, like, oh man, this was so bad, but it was bad, but I mean, it kind of they kind of prepare you for a lot of that. And but what I've really noticed in a lot of veterans that have gone through the global war on terror is that they don't experience some of those um, events as far as like the episodes and whatnot until maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years afterward, and then it finally hits them. I mean, so I mean that can go on as long as that, and I've realized that there've never been a whole lot of studies about that where these veterans are so closed off that and they've never allowed themselves to feel so much that when they actually start readjusting to civilian life, then they realize, that wasn't normal. And then that's what starts bringing up these little things like the smell of any kind of burning like a campfire or something like that. That brings back these little things in my mind that I remember back to being in Iraq or Afghanistan. That it was just those little triggers, those little triggers here and there, and then even hearing the sound of sand, and then that would bring up like kind of like a little like it would just take me back, and it would be like a quick flash within 10 to 15 seconds that I would remember where I was at. And that's just kind of like like the hyper vigilance, and being like always on guard, or like even when I wake up and it's too quiet, I need to have something that's going because your mind's always going, but that hypervigilance to always remain in that state. And as well as I've seen a lot of veterans that have gone through that trying to relax the mind and put themselves in a little bit more better state so that they're able to even just go to sleep sometimes. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
No, Ryan, I appreciate you bringing that up because it provides kind of a, a narrative of what we're talking about. So I appreciate you kind of giving us that kind of example because all I'm really doing, right, is listing these things off. But when you hear it being experienced, it helps bring this to life for us. So I appreciate your input and your willingness to talk about it. So please do share. Um, and there should be some things that are noted, Kay, and it's important to understand that some of the things that a person who has PTSD experiences is normal for us to experience when we've gone through trauma. Okay. It's very normal for if the brain thinks it's in danger, for us to become hypervigilant, for us to be you have a exaggerated startle response, have trouble concentrating. So that's normal. Okay. What's not normal is that it happens without the almost control of the individual. It interrupts your ability to, again, if we look here at G, to in, socially be out there, occupation, and other important areas of function that it really does affect and make it so it's difficult to re-engage in the world. Okay. Um, and again, going back to Ryan's example, a lot of what he was trained was not to feel these disturbing thoughts and whatnot while engaged in the battlefield that he was engaged in. But then it becomes an abnormality because then it follows the individual outside of that place. Okay. And that's where, again, we need to be aware of this moving forward. Okay. Now, with every disorder, I do need to mention, I do want to go through a few of these more, is H. Uh, there are certain physical medical conditions that can cause what we would call PTSD-like symptoms. Okay, so for example, people with certain cardiac conditions, people with certain muscle disorders, can experience a lot of these symptoms, not due to a traumatic event, but due to their physiological reactions to their medical condition or certain medications, or even alcohol can cause a lot of PTSD symptoms. So we do need to be clear that what we're talking here is a response, a unprovoked response due to trauma that has occurred. Okay. Um, and we should also just talk a little bit about the dissociative symptoms. Okay. In addition to these PTSD reactions, individuals can go through what's called depersonalization or derealization. Okay. Depersonalization is a persistent or recurrent experience of feeling detached, and as if one were outside observer, one's mental processes or body. Okay. And again, going back to survivors I've worked with, that's a very common experience of people who were especially very violently assaulted. Okay. And or another way this can be experienced is what's called derealization. It's a persistent or recurrent experience of unreality of surroundings. The world, for example, the world around the individual experience is unreal. It's dreamlike, distorted, or distant. Okay. Um, and again, we do have to make sure we rule out different substances and seizure conditions when we're looking at this. But these are two very persistent things when we're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. All right. So that is PTSD. And this will be one of the groups that we'll focus on as we move forward. I do want to go ahead and get through the second disorder that we want to talk about. Let me discard here. And that is, oh, borderline personality disorder. So this one, I'm not going to talk a lot. Actually, I'm going to play a video and then we'll kind of talk about the disorder itself. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video and then we will talk about the symptomology. Oh, oops, I got it. Hold on. I forgot.
Cheddar. I set fire to your empire. I blow smoke in your face, burn tires. Yes, J.I.A.
Drinking makes me happy. It makes my blood circulation run faster, making me feel hot and energetic. Clubbing is all about the music, dancing, drinking, and hunting. That is why I love it there. When I wake up in the morning, I like taking photos of the guy who is sleeping next to me. I just think they look so beautiful, and I want to capture that moment.
Been handling Emily's case for about 8 months. The first time I met her, she was a quiet girl, barely spoke to me. Over the first few sessions, I came to learn more about Emily and helped her to explain what she was feeling. Her concerns about loneliness, about not fitting in, not being part of the world that she was living in. And after about 6 sessions of working with Emily, I began to formulate some ideas around the problem. I was beginning to think that we perhaps were working with someone suffering from a borderline personality disorder. The difficulty with long-lasting relationships, this inability to form and retain any sort of relationship, whether it's with a male or female, was a fundamental problem for Emily and is the first starting point for the 9 criteria associated with borderline personality disorder. And we could see in Emily's case this apparent addiction to promiscuity, to alcohol and substance abuse. Another symptom of personality disorder could be seen in an unstable self-image. Emily, like other personality disorder sufferers, had this problem of feeling tremendously empty, of not belonging.
Sometimes I feel so happy, but most of the time I feel sad. It's like I'm alone, empty, hopeless, and in pain. All at the same time. I really don't understand myself.
Borderline personality disorder can occur in any social class, in anyone. You can find that some families have what's referred to as the perfect family syndrome, where issues are brushed under the carpet, not acknowledged. And this builds up through a young person's life and becomes a trauma, a disorder in their normal social functioning. And it was my opinion that this is what was happening to Emily. Further definitions of personality disorder can be seen in unnecessary emotional outbursts, the failure to control one's immediate reactions to a given situation, not applying social skills. And unfortunately, Emily found it incredibly difficult to control these emotional outbursts, which to many of the people around her appeared to be totally inappropriate against the situation that they found themselves in.
I try my best to look happy, but I'm dying inside.
In many cases of personality disorder, we can see suicidal tendencies, and in Emily's case, this was manifested by self-harming. Again, not uncommon. Personality disorders can be successfully dealt with. The difficulty is that the healthcare worker, the doctor, the social worker, the consultant has to spend an inordinate amount of time to support the person concerned, to build up a basis of trust and faith that doesn't collapse after a series of interviews, counselling sessions. And in Emily's case, that was what was required. It is possible to achieve 100% success when working with borderline personality disorders, but we can never ignore the commitment and time and requirement necessary to help people suffering from this condition.
Okay. So I can't talk all of a sudden. I want to mention why this is called a personality disorder. If you notice when we talked about PTSD, the symptoms were not controllable, meaning the person doesn't have control over the trauma experience. Okay. This is similar to borderline personality disorder because, again, if you look at this list, we may all, not all of us, but we may all have the feelings of being abandoned at some point in our lives. We may have periods where our relationships are very rocky and intense. We have times when we question our identities and who we are. And sometimes we can be very impulsive, meaning that we all can experience these things, but they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily going to drive every aspect of our life. Okay. So when we talk about this borderline personality disorder, it's important that these things, while they look intentional, are not intentional. And so when we look at this, we have 5 of the 9. Frantic effort to avoid real or imagined abandonment, unstable or intense intense interpersonal relationships, identity, not knowing who you are, having a low self-esteem, impulsivity. When I worked with BPT people, it tended to be things like substance use, reckless driving, binge eating, sexual issues, or high risk sexual activities, reoccurrent suicidal behaviors or gestures, marked reactive moods, chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate intense anger, and transient stress-related paranoia ideation or severe what we disassociation, much like how we saw with individuals with PTSD. Okay. Now, one thing when we look at BPT is it is a reactive type of disorder, much like PTSD, in that what we tend to find is that individuals get stabilized, they start working towards success, and then when they get to the point of achieving that success, they then go through this pattern behavior of wrecking. It seems like they're just self-destructing their lives. Okay. One of the people that I worked with she was actually a teen, and she went through a complete borderline disassociation about 2 weeks before she could graduate high school, and that made it so she couldn't graduate high school. Okay. We see this in relationships. When there's a marked success in a relationship, that they then start to go through these pattern behaviors it seems like very self-destructive experiences. Okay. So these are the 2 disorders that we're going to be working with over the next couple of weeks, to kind of look at how different group processes can be used for these different types of disorders. But I am going to stop here, and I'm going to